This is kind of the podcast of hypotheticals. What we
Yeah,
think
for
that
sure.
I mean
That's
that's
draft
all
season, right?
exactly. It's just a world of hypotheticals. And I kind of want to go through some things of what you would do or what you think might happen or what you think Ryan Poles will do or stuff like that. So I have some hypotheticals and also just some questions. I know you've been talking to draft guys this past month or so, and I just kind of want to get some insight on guys you maybe that have struck your fancy or maybe fans don't know about that you think could maybe make some headlines.
hmm
Um, so I'll start there. Who are in this draft process this past month or so? Who are some guys that you've talked to besides the big names that everyone kind of knows about? Who are maybe some guys that fans don't know too much about that have kind of caught your eye?
Yeah, that's a tough question because there's so many guys, there's so many names. I will say, this is not a guy who fans don't know about, but I've been working on a story on Lucas Van Ness, who is somewhat of an unknown as far as first round picks go because he hasn't played a ton of football. He's played 2 seasons at Iowa. He's an edge rusher who a lot of people think are going to go in the first round and could potentially go pretty high. And he's a local guy. He played at Barrington and worked his way up at Iowa. Kind of he redshirted that first year and had to wait his turn. And he is just so intriguing because he has all the tools, and that's what a lot of times you see NFL teams really like those guys with the tools, and maybe he hasn't shown it as much on the field. I think he had 6 or 7 sacks last season, which is a fine number, but it's not gonna blow anybody away. But those tools, that speed and athleticism that he has is super intriguing to teams, and I think that they can sort of envision what he's going to be coming off the edge or what he can be. Other guys who I think are intriguing. I think the tight end out of Utah, Dalton Kincaid, is another guy who like teams could mold him into whatever they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
He is another guy who maybe didn't have a ton of experience in college, but you're looking at what he can do physically, athletically, and you're looking at a guy who you think could be even better than he was in college. And then, there's a lot of intrigue with a lot of these receivers. I think, especially you look further down past the first round, there's a lot of smaller, quicker receivers, and we see that that's becoming a bigger thing year after year. Just the way that these guys are being used in college, these shorter, faster guys are really valuable, and some of them translate to the NFL, some of them don't, and I think there's a lot of interesting prospects in that group when you look at who's available in the second round and third round and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy you brought up Lucas Van Ness because he's someone that's kind of been on my mind where I see the hype and I also don't see the hype. As you said, the guy is built. I mean, I think they call him Hercules or whatever. He's built just like a physical specimen.
Yeah.
And you see the speed to power, and like you said, you see what he could become with those physical traits. My caution with him is just that even though I know he played a good majority of snaps, he wasn't considered a starter at Iowa, which always now maybe that's just a technicality on how they listed him on the depth chart, but it for someone who is potentially going to get drafted, let's say top 20, just to be safe, it's probably going to go higher than that. I find it interesting that on his college team, he was not listed as a starter. Anyone who you think is drafted top 20 would be considered a superstar on their team. And I think one of the most interesting things about the draft is drafting a player based off of their statistical production in college versus their can this guy turn into a superstar because of his physical traits? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and Lucas Van Ness is exactly that. I think Anthony Richardson, the Florida quarterback, is another perfect example of that. I think you can't have a conversation about Lucas Van Ness without the fact that he never started a game coming up in that conversation. And I think that's more of an Iowa thing where they wanted their seniors to start, and I get that. Like, you at a program like that where guys sometimes wait 3-4 years before they get their chance to play at certain positions. You're going to reward those seniors who have put in the time and effort. And certainly that's Iowa's view on that anyway. When you look at the who actually wound up playing the most snaps, I mean, Lucas was the guy. He was going to be in there when they needed a pass rush. He was going to be on the field, and I think NFL teams are going to be willing to overlook the fact that he didn't start because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter in football if you're starting or not. It's what it comes down to is are you on the field when it matters most? I think that's a little bit more important than maybe who's out there for the first snaps. But yeah, it's definitely a conversation topic, and you're right in that you look at the numbers with Lucas and. It's not overwhelming. 11 tackles for loss last season in 13 games. That's a nice number. 6.5 sacks. Second team All Big Ten. This is definitely one of those guys who you're drafting for potential, and you can see what he did on those relatively limited number of college snaps. You got 2 full seasons to look at him now, so it's not like you have nothing to go off of. But yeah, there's certainly going to be some teams who want to see more.
If the Bears were to take him, do you think there'd be a gripe with Cole Kmet with Van Ness dating his daughter? Or not his daughter, his sister, excuse me.
I don't think there'd be a gripe. I think there'd be. I think they would love that. I think those two would have a lot of fun with that. And certainly Lucas and his family and the Barrington community would love it if he wound up in Chicago. He's a hometown guy. He grew up playing hockey actually in the suburbs and didn't play football till 8th grade. And um, Iowa was just like the school for him. He has family out there. His older sister, when he was in high school, his older sister was going to school there. So like as soon as he got that offer, there was no doubt he was going to Iowa. I think he would love it if he could stay relatively close in the Midwest and come back to Chicago.
Well, and I don't know if you just saw the Bears' recent 1920 video that they released last night or 2 nights ago. But it's certainly been a theme this offseason with getting guys that are either fans of the Bears or grew up being fans or from the Chicago area. You got Tunyon, you got TJ Edwards. It's certainly something that they're kind of keeping in the back of their mind when they either decide to sign a guy in free agency or potentially we'll see if when they draft a guy.
Yeah, and I kind of love that because these are guys who know what it means to be a Chicago Bear. They want to win. You sign in free agency with a team, and you obviously always want to win. That's your goal. You want to play on a winning team, but you go back to your hometown. I mean, you're going to want to win for that team so much more, not just for yourself, but for your family, for your friends, and all that. And I think this draft is fun because there's not just Lucas Van Ness, but Peter Skoronski is another guy up there at the top of the draft who could be there for the Bears at number 9, who has those hometown vibes, a hometown story. Those two guys actually played each other their junior year of high school. They were lined up for there was a regular season game, Maine South against Barrington, and they got to square off. And it would be a really cool story if one of those guys wound up with the Bears.
Yeah. All right, so I want to go through a couple of hypotheticals. One
Sure.
that I have here. So if the Bears stick at 9, and these 5 players are there, who do you think they're taking? We have Jalen Carter, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tyree Wilson, Paris Johnson, and Peter Skoronski. Who do you think pulls the trigger on?
Off the top of my head, I'm going to go with Tyree Wilson. I think, we can pretty much assume that Will Anderson's going to be gone. He's going to be that first edge rusher gone, probably first defender gone. That's the Bears' biggest area of need. And I think Tyree Wilson could potentially be gone when they come up at number 9. But if he's there, I think that's the pick. I know there's been a lot of talk about them taking a tackle, trying to get a lineman to protect Justin Fields. That's a fine thing to do. But I think if you have one of the top 2 pass rushers in this draft available, I think you got to do it. It's hard to get a read on the Jalen Carter stuff because every team's going to have a little bit different opinion. I tend to think that he's not going to fall that far because his legal issues are he came to a deal, and so that's more or less settled. Not that it doesn't mean it still looks bad and the whole story isn't worse than maybe a couple of misdemeanors indicates. But NFL teams are going to overlook that, man. They will give people second chances. They will certainly NFL players have had far worse legal troubles than a couple of misdemeanors. So I tend to think that Jalen Carter is going to be gone. If he's there, personally, I wouldn't draft him, but I don't know how the Bears are feeling about that.
That's interesting that's your take. Which I think is what makes this draft so insane, is because everyone has a different opinion. Me personally, I would take Carter just because of the raw physical talent. I do agree with you. If I had to put money on it, I think he is not there when the Bears pick at 9. If I were Ryan Poles, I would be sprinting to the podium if he is there at 9. But we know that Poles is a big character guy, and he likes building, he cares a lot about the locker room culture and having guys that fit that. And maybe they deem Jalen Carter doesn't fit that, but who knows? Yeah, that's interesting, man. I was not expecting you to say Tyree Wilson. I really wasn't.
I just think pass rush is their number one need. And if you got one of the top 2 guys, you go and get him. I know Jalen Carter is clearly the best defensive tackle and probably should be a top 5 pick. If you're not looking at the off the field stuff. I don't know. I have a hard time seeing George McCaskey signing off on taking a guy like that. Now, George says he's not going to, meddle in football stuff, and that's the, what they'll always tell you. But I just have a hard time seeing the Bears taking a guy with those kind of issues, especially for Ryan Poles. I mean, this may wind up being the biggest draft of his GM career, and it's only his second one, but you got to get this pick right. And are you going to want to risk that with a guy who might be a little bit immature, who's made some mistakes? Not that people don't deserve second chances, but this is a huge draft for you. I don't think you want to take any risks.
No, I hear you. I do think, yeah, I think it's kind of sometimes going the safer route, and in this instance is the right decision. All right, Tyree Wilson.
I can't say I've ever been an NFL GM though, because these guys, they're at the end of the day, they're trying to win, and if Jalen Carter is going to help you win, somebody's going to take him.
Right. All right, I want to go through another one. There's been a lot of smoke right now about trading back. There's some rumors coming out that possibly the Steelers are interested. There's been talk about the Commanders being interested. To me, I think if they were able to trade back into that mid-teen range, acquire another early to mid-second rounder, and get a guy, get another offensive tackle, maybe it's Darnell Wright, maybe it's Broderick Jones, I think that could be a home run, because then you're basically set up with 4 second-round picks, because the one in the 3rd round is the 64th overall pick, and you're still getting, now maybe it's someone like Lucas Van Ness. Maybe they feel like Lucas Van Ness has the potential to be a star edge rusher. But I think I would be fully on board with trading back and acquiring another mid to early second rounder.
I would be absolutely on board with that as well. I mean, if the scenario plays out, especially if, Will Levis or Anthony Richardson drops and is still there when the Bears are up at number 9, I mean, you're going to have the possibility of getting a pretty good haul for whoever wants to move up and take him, if there is a team out there that wants to do that. And that's the big question, who's going to be looking to move up? Certainly those teams you mentioned, Washington needs a quarterback. Tennessee, who's only a couple spots down, needs a quarterback. You could argue Detroit might be looking for a quarterback. It's kind of hard to say with them. Another team too is that I keep coming back to, and this is more just gut feel than any actual intel, is Tampa Bay. I mean, what is their real plan? Is Baker Mayfield isn't going to be their long-term plan. I don't think Kyle Trask, while he might be a good backup, he hasn't really shown that he could be a starting quarterback in the NFL. Maybe they're a team who looks to make a move to get a quarterback. But if you're the Bears and you have that chance to trade down, I think they're absolutely going to look long and hard at that. Shortly after the trade for the number 1 overall pick, Peter King, talked to Ryan Poles and in his Monday morning column, and there was a quote in there about how intrigued Poles was about the possibility of trading back twice with Houston and then with Carolina. Obviously, that didn't pan out that way, but if he has a chance to get another future first round pick, he's going to do that. That would be, to have 3 next year would be pretty insane. And I think if you start talking about trading down with a team who's down, 16, 17, 18, 19, that's what's going to cost to move up to number 9.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, when you look at the best comp for that is the Justin Fields trade. I mean, that was
Absolutely.
11 to 20, and that was a first. So I agree. I mean, I know we're focused on this year's draft, but just on paper, next year's draft looks even more ridiculous. I mean, you have guys, Joe Alt, you got Marvin Harrison Jr., you got some edge rushers in there, and of course, you got the quarterbacks at the top with Kalen Williams and Drake May. So next year's draft, at least right now, I know it is literally a year away.
Yeah.
But next year's draft, on paper, is looking like it could be one of those, holy crap, this class is insane. And if the Bears have 3 first-round picks for that, that would be, they could have some real firepower. What do you think?
And just on that note, Ryan Poles has done a really good job of realizing that he has to rebuild a whole football team. It's not just 1 or 2 positions. And so, if he can give himself more ammunition to do that, I think he would strongly consider that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. He certainly has made it clear since his first press conference that he values building through the draft. He values draft picks. And if they have a guy in that, 15 to 20 range that they think can be a day 1 starter, I think he would surely pull the trigger on a trade back. What do you think is the chance that the Bears kind of go off script at 9, that they go a corner, or I'll throw it out, they go Bijan? How likely do you think that is, that they kind of shock everyone?
I'll say this, this is a totally contradictory statement, but I will never be surprised when NFL teams surprise us. Like they're gonna do some funky things sometimes, especially in the draft. I don't think anybody expected Poles to take 2 defensive backs with his top 2 picks last year. That was a surprise on a much smaller scale. So I could see him doing a lot of different things at number 9. I will say I am firmly in the camp that I don't see Ryan Poles taking a running back at number 9. I know Bijan Robinson might be, he might be the rookie of the year next year. He might wind up being the best player in this draft. But I just think from where Poles is coming from, he spent all those years in a Chiefs organization that hasn't paid a running back in nearly a decade. And I just don't think that they're going to use a pick that premium of a pick on a running back. Now, if they trade back, maybe. But I have a hard time seeing them doing that at number 9. Not that he might be the best player in this draft, and I think somebody's going to take him. I think that is the biggest wild card, I feel like, in this draft, is where is Bijan Robinson going to go? Because we run through these mocks, and we play the game and go through these scenarios, and I could see some team snatching him at the back end of the top 10. I could see him falling all the way into the 20s. It's really hard to know with the running backs, especially just the way they've been devalued these past few years.
Yeah, I know. I agree. Bijan is going to be a huge wild card. I would say the earliest, which would kind of be a shock, would be 8 at Atlanta. I mean, they need a running back. They have Tyler Algier, and they have an aging Cordell Patterson. That's a team that you got Kyle Pitts, you got Drake London. Let's see what Desmond Ridder is. Let's get him potentially a star running back. But I also agree he could slip. But maybe he goes 10 to the Eagles. Maybe the Eagles feel like Bijan's the piece that gets them over the hump. Or maybe the devaluation of running backs continues, and like you said, he falls to the 20 range. Are you buying any of this smoke that came out from, I don't know if it's smoke, but the report from Adam Schefter yesterday that the Texans may not take a quarterback at 2 overall?
I want to say I'm not buying that. I mean, the Texans are a tough team to get a read on. Nick Caserio is kind of a wild card there. You could throw the Cardinals in that same boat because they have a first-year GM who we don't really know a whole lot about. But I gotta think this is the time to get your quarterback if you're Houston. I mean, you don't have the number 2 overall pick all that often, and we're talking about a draft where we think there's going to be 4 first-round quarterbacks. I mean, if you have your pick of the 3 remaining ones after Carolina, I can't imagine them not taking a quarterback in that spot. I know Will Anderson is supposed to be a really, really good pass rusher. I know Jalen Carter is easily the best defensive tackle in this draft, and one of the best ones we've seen in recent years. And yeah, they have a lot of needs. Like, they're a team that needs to completely rebuild, but it is so much easier to go through a rebuild when you have your quarterback, or at least when you have a guy who you want to let play for a couple of years and see what happens. That's the one, that's the one thing the Bears have, or at least have for 2023, is they know they have this quarterback thing figured out at least for one more year, see where it goes. You don't want to be in QB purgatory. I gotta think the Texans are taking a quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with you. Again, the talk of next year's draft class and the quarterbacks in there, potentially 2 stars. But the idea of, well, one, how do you sell to a fan base? We're just going to kind of throw away this season. And 2, how do you sell to your team? Hey, we kind of want another top 3 pick next year, so we can get either Caleb Williams or Drake May, or maybe, someone else comes up. Because what happens if you end up winning 6 games and now you have the 5th or 6th overall pick? What are you going to do? Trade a haul just to move up and get a quarterback? So I agree. I think, like you said, the Bears are in such a crazy situation where they had the number 1 overall pick and didn't need a quarterback. When you're a team like the Texans and you're sitting at number 2 and Davis Mills is clearly not your long-term answer, you can't just bank on, we're going to have the number 2 overall pick next year and get a guy in a QB class next year that on paper looks like it's better than this year. So I agree. I'm not buying much of that either. Maybe the Texans like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson and try to do a trade back and get one of those guys. But like you said, you cannot be in QB purgatory. You have to have a guy who at least the team and the fan base can rally around. And I do think both CJ Stroud and Bryce Young can most certainly be franchise guys.
Yeah, and you can only be that bad for so long. Before people start getting fired, before, whether or not people are getting fired, the fan base is going to check out. And that's never a good thing. Owners don't like that. They want butts in seats. And, another year of we don't have a quarterback, but we're rebuilding, that's going to be a real hard thing to sell in Houston.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite players in the draft is Jackson Smith-Njigba. I know the Bears traded for DJ Moore. They have 3 solid receivers, and a little bit of a side note, I think Chase Claypool is the key to whether this offense turns into being something really good or is still average. Because if Chase Claypool, I've talked to some people about this, if Chase Claypool goes back to what he was in his rookie year and his second year and builds off of that and produces a 1,000-yard season and 8 touchdowns, we know what Darnell Mooney is. We know what DJ Moore is. If Chase Claypool all of a sudden is like a semi number 1 receiver or a really, really good number 2, this Bears offense could be extremely dangerous. But going back to Jackson Smith-Njigba, is drafting him at 9 or possibly trading back, let's say with Tennessee and 11, is drafting Jackson Smith-Njigba putting too many resources into one position? Or is it, if you believe Jackson Smith-Njigba is the next Cooper Kupp and is going to be a Pro Bowl level receiver, that you just say, screw it, you can never have too many weapons?
Yeah, I mean, if that's the type of grade that Ryan Poles has on him, that he could be a Pro Bowl type player, yeah, you say screw it, you get the playmaker. But if you're looking at Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, and you're saying all those guys are pretty good players, but not one of them stands out to us over the others. Mm-hmm. I think you have so many other needs that you need to try to address those other needs, and maybe you could trade back and wind up getting one of those guys a little bit later on. I think wide receiver is one of those positions. I talked about Bijan Robinson being a bit of a wild card. Wide receiver is too, because I think if you asked NFL personnel, about those top 4 or 5 receivers, you're going to get different answers from a lot of people about who's the best one, what's the order these guys go in. And I think it's going to be really hard to tell, because we've had a couple drafts in a row where especially last year, where wide receivers were absolutely at a premium. You had teams trading up for wide receivers. You had multiple wide receivers in the top 10. You had 5, 6 receivers going in recent years in the first round. And this year, I think as a whole, the group is pretty good, but there's not like, there's no Jamar Chase. There's no guy who stands out above the others. And so
Right.
I don't know what's going to happen with them. I wouldn't be surprised if there's like I could see one of these guys going, late in the top 10 or early in the 11, 12, 13 range. But I also wouldn't be surprised if there's a little mini run on receivers at the back end of the teens and into the early 20s, especially when you start looking at some of those teams that are back there that could use a receiver in the Chargers and Baltimore and Seattle possibly. If the Bears have a grade like that on one of these guys, yeah, I could see that happening. But I think you're right in that they want to see what this offense looks like with Chase Claypool. I don't think they're ready to give up on him yet.
Yeah.
Because December was kind of a wash. It was a tough, he was injured, Fields was injured. You couldn't really read much into that.
Yeah.
I think you got to get these three receivers out there and see what they can do together. Now, I do think, in saying that, I also do think they're still going to look for another receiver. It just might not be in the first round.
Yeah, I agree. I do think there is going to be a receiver drafted by the Bears in the first, let's just say first 4 rounds, or maybe that first pick in the 5th.
I would agree with that.
They're certainly going to look to add depth. I mean, right now, hopefully Bayless can develop into some sort of speed gadget guy that, can maybe put up 400, 500 yards and get you some, the end arounds and get you a few go balls and stuff like that. They re-signed Equanimous St. Brown, who I think is a fine depth piece, really good blocker. So right now, yeah, you got 5 guys. I mean, those 5 guys are going to make the team. But I do think it would help, barring anyone gets injured or something like that. You don't want an instance where, like last year, Dante Pettis is like your wide receiver 1/2 for some games. It would be nice, some guys I like in that range, maybe like a Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State. There's some other guys back there in that 3rd, 4th, 5th round that I think could be, very solid depth piece. And you never know. Some guys, Amon-Ra St. Brown was a 4th round pick, and he turns out to be a wide receiver 1 for the Lions. So I agree. Now personally, I would not complain for a second if they drafted Jackson Smith and Jigba, because I really think he's going to be that good. But I do think if I put my head in where Ryan Poles is, I think he would much more value having a tackle or having an edge rusher than, okay, now we have 4 legit wide receivers, because then you're putting yourself in a point where next year, one of them, you're not going to have 4 guys on your team, unless they decide to re-sign Mooney and Claypool and pay DJ Moore. I just don't think that that's a route they would go. But also, like you said, if they have a grade on him where they think Jackson Smith and Jigba is a star, maybe they just view that, hey, maybe having so many good weapons will partially fix some of the offensive line, because Fields won't have to hold onto the ball as long, because he'll have guys getting open more. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why getting DJ Moore was such a big thing with that trade, is getting a playmaker. That's one less high priority need in the draft. And so, I would say I don't think it's likely they take a receiver in the first round, because they were able to swing that trade and get DJ Moore as part of that package. But certainly anything's on the table.
Yeah, those are all the question scenarios I have. I'm so excited to watch your coverage from Hallis Hall when it comes up. What is it like? You were at Hallis Hall last year, of course, during the draft. What is it like in the building during draft day?
It's fun. It's that anticipation sort of starts to build, especially like obviously it's going to be exciting as the draft gets started, but as picks 6, 7, 8 start coming in, and you start getting that feeling like, okay, it's time, like the Bears are going to do something here. You do get that anticipation builds, and things can get pretty hectic, especially when you got if they potentially trade down. You got all kinds of stuff going on. You got trades, you got players going at the same time. You're kind of watching, keeping an eye on what other teams are doing, because while we're really focused on the Bears, all that stuff affects, every pick affects the next one, and so on. It's an exciting time to be in the building, and the first round is really fun. I think everybody really likes watching that on Thursday night, and Certainly those are a lot of the players whose names fans are well aware of. And but really the whole 3-day event is fun and hectic, and it's a good time.
Yeah, I'm ecstatic to be down in Kansas City. I mean, that's an environment that I mean, the draft to me is truly one of my favorite events, if not my favorite event of the entire season. To actually be down there, and with the players that will be in Kansas City and the rest of the media, it's going to be a pretty crazy scene down there. And I think this draft is going to be a really interesting one. I think this is in recent memory, one of the few drafts where no one really seems to know what anyone's kind of doing. You know, even at the top, no one really knows yet if it's going to be Bryce Young or CJ Stroud going 1. And after that, yeah, it looks like Will Anderson is probably going to go 3, but that's if the Cardinals decide to stay there. The Cardinals are a huge team that could trade out. And then it's like, okay, what quarterback's taken next? Does it go quarterback 1 through 4? This is a draft. You know, I feel like a lot of times the draft, okay, the first 5 picks, like the draft starts kind of pick 6, 7, 8. This is a draft where I don't think really anyone knows what's going to happen.
No, I would absolutely agree. You know, NFL teams have gotten more and more secretive as every single year passes, and it's led us to this where we're literally, as we were just a few minutes ago, questioning what Houston's going to do at number 2. Are they going to take a quarterback or not? And so we don't know what anyone's going to do. I think that's what makes this really fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for joining me today. Like I said, I'm so excited to see your coverage as a Bears fan, as someone who covers the Bears. This could be a franchise-altering draft. You know, they got a lot of ammunition. They got 10 draft picks without any trade back scenarios. This is going to be a fun one. We have not seen a Bears draft in recent memory since Ryan Pace, excuse me, sometimes didn't load the Bears up with as many draft picks as fans would have liked. But Foles is got his ammunition. He's ready to do some fun stuff.
Yeah, Bears fans should be excited, and you know, thanks for having me again. I always enjoy jumping on with you, and enjoy your trip down to Kansas City. That's going to be fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm extremely excited just to be in that atmosphere and see what that world is like for a couple of days down there.